I'm going to talk about optimal design of renewable energy certificate markets, and the approach that we use is a principal agent method game approach. So this is joint work with Arvind Shrivans, who was a postdoc at the time at Princeton University and now has joined the industry for a while, and Sebastian J. Mangal at the University of Toronto. Get started. So first, I'll start with an introduction just to put our problem in the context and explain why this is an important problem. So it's no surprise that climate change is one of the most serious issues that we are facing right now, and this could have very serious and disastrous consequences, as you can see here, such as increase in sea levels, irregular weather patterns, extreme natural disasters, or climate migration. So as a result of this, governments have agreed to reduce their emissions. So the most notable example of this is a Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, where the world's largest polluters, they agreed to reduce their emissions of carbon dioxide. But it is unfortunate that this agreement doesn't have any binding mechanisms to just force the governments to reduce their emissions. So it is really up to the individual governments to decide how they want to reduce their emissions. So here, this leads to the idea of environmental policy and regulation as a means for governments, both provincial and national, to achieve their climate goals. So here you see two types of environmental regulations in this regard. So the first one is carbon tax. So it's a tax imposed on the emissions which are required for producing products and goods. And the second one is a market-based emissions regulation policy. So this is in two forms, so cap and trade markets, and also more recently, renewable energy certificate market. So I'll get back to these two and explain how this type of markets work in a second. But before that, I want to emphasize that there are two important research questions in this area. So one is related to the investigating the efficacy of each one of these policies and comparing their efficiency. And the other one, which is the focus of our research, is that given that we have enough and valid environmental reasons to set up a market-based system, so then what is the best way to do that? How can we optimally design such a market? So in particular, I will present our results in the context of a renewable energy resource market, but our model and our results can be trivially extended to the case of cap and trade markets, because these two markets are very closely related to each other. So now I'll explain how this type of markets work. So first, what is a renewable energy certificate, or for short, EREC? EREC provides proof that 1 megawatt hour of electricity has been generated through an eligible renewable resource and was fed to the grid. So it acts like a tracking mechanism, because once the clean energy is fed to the network, then one cannot distinguish whether it was generated through a renewable resource or not. Now, regulators use these regs in compliance markets to require the regulated firms to provide a specific percentage of their generation through renewable energy resources. So there are compliance periods at the end of which the firms should submit their regs, and in case of any lacking reg, they should pay monetary penalty to the regulator. Moreover, these regs are market-based instruments, so they can be traded on the market, and their price is driven by supply and demand clearly. Okay, now in the context of compliance markets, there are two problems we can look into. One is the so-called agents problem, which concerns the regulated firms participating in the market, and the other one is the principals or the regulators problem. In our prior work, we have addressed the agents problem. So for a fixed penalty function, so the most common penalty function that is used is a hockey stick penalty function or a put option like penalty function. So for this specific choice of penalty function, we have investigated the optimal behavior of firms in such a market in terms of their trading strategies, and their generation strategies. And we showed that these best response strategies, they yield a Nash equilibrium for the market. Moreover, we endogenize the price process, so we don't assume an exogenous dynamics for the price process. Indeed, we derive the price process that equates the supply and demand of REX. So we call this equilibrium price or market clearing price. Okay, so now this was all done in our prior work, given a specific choice of penalty function. In this work, we yes.
In the model that you showed, what else was a decision variable apart from price? Only price was a decision variable.
I will present our model in a few minutes, but so I will explain. It is generation, policy, strategy, and trading. Yeah, and then the clearing price is a result of that. Okay. So we get that as a result of the trading strategies of agents. I will explain everything in details. Okay, so in this work, we consider an arbitrary choice of penalty function for the regulator and wants to see what is the best penalty function from the perspective of regulator to implement to achieve its own goals. So for this, we should consider the problem of the regulator and the agents at the same time, because these two interact with each other. And it is very natural to use ideas from principal-agent problems. So here I will just very quickly review principal-agent games. So in this type of games, it was originated in the seminal work of Stackelberg in 2008, an economist. This type of problems involves two parties, one agent and one principal, and principal proposes a contract to agents to perform a task or project on their behalf. So now doing the project takes some efforts on the agent's part, and it is costly to them. Of course, agents are compensated by the principal, but there is always this moral hazard that can occur in this context, because the principal usually cannot observe the actions of the agent, but only the task, so the result of their actions. And his goal is to design a contract such that it maximizes its own utility, and also the contract should be attractive enough for the agents to accept it. So it shouldn't be too costly, or it should have a minimum amount of profit for the agent. So principal, by considering these 2 points, should design an optimal penalty function. Okay, now since 2008, this problem has been extended in various directions, and in particular recently to principal-agent mean-field games. So in this problem, there is one principal. So in the original problem, there is one principal and one agent. However, in this work, there is one principal and a large number of agents which are non-cooperative. And the large population game between the agents, it's approximated by a mean-field game. So in our work, the principal is the regulator and the agents are regulated firms. Now, what is their contribution with respect to the literature? So this work makes both the theoretical and economical contributions. On the theory side, we formulate a problem of one principal and a large number of agents, where agents are subject to a clearing condition. So adding this clearing condition, which sets supply and demand equal, adds some complexity to the formulation of our problem, such that we are not able to use the principal agent mean-field game on the paper that I explained. So this is one of the contributions. Moreover, all the literature investigates a weak formulation of principal agent problems, but indeed the strong formulation of the problem is a valid research question. So we do all this in the context of REC markets, and we obtain some interesting economical results as well. Okay, so now without further ado, I will present our setup. Okay, so first I will present the agent's problem and then the principal's problem. For the agent's problem, we assume that the market consists of n firms in K subpopulations. So agents in each subpopulation, they share the same model parameters, which are different from those in other subpopulations. The control action of a representative agent has three components. So one is generation rate, so the amount of rate generated per unit time due to renting facilities. So for example, in the context of solar renewable energy certificate market, this is like renting solar panels. And then we have this generation capacity expansion effort. So this is like investing in new facilities, buying more solar panels. And then we have the trading rate. So this is the amount of RECs traded per unit time by the firm. Its state process has two components, the REC inventory, so the amount of REC that has acquired up to time T, and also its generation capacity expansion. So this is the dynamics of a generic agent. So its REC inventory is accumulated with respect to the baseline generation rate for which it has already the facility, and it is it increases with the generation rate as a result of renting and also expanding facilities. It is also a function of the trading rate, and we have this stochastic term. So this models the stochasticity in the renewable energy resources. So for example, the stochasticity or uncertainty in the intensity of the sunlight. So this stochastic term together with planned generation rates indeed gives us the realized generation. Okay, and then we have this generation capacity expansion, which is a function of the capacity expansion efforts. So here we see the running cost of a representative firm. So it has two parts, generation cost and trading cost. The generation cost due to renting or investing in new facilities, expanding facilities. And in the trading part, we have the transaction cost and also the trading revenue. So this is the product of the rate price and the trading rate. But I haven't yet talked about this rate price. I will get to that in a minute. Yes.
Isn't the capacity expansion on a different time scale than the renting? I mean, obviously building nuclear power stations takes a quarter of a century planned completion, but even building solar panels will take maybe a year, whereas the other time constant might be
there are some delays associated with that, but we haven't modeled that here, and we assume that they can instantly increase their capacity.
There is no fixed cost as well for generation of capacity. I mean, installing capacity. Right?
So this is the baseline that they have, and this is the cost of capacity expansion.
Fixed cost component. That's why you can assume that it's continuous. But if there was fixed cost component of installing capacity, which is what is assumed in the literature on capacity generation, then you cannot continuously invest that because you can have infinite costs.
So this is with the assumption that there's no delay in that, and this is the baseline capacity generation capacity data, and this model is just the expansion effort. In terms of, so this is the running cost, and in terms of the terminal cost, so this is the penalty budget that is set by the regulator. So this could be an arbitrary function, and it's a Markov function of the number of RECs accumulated or acquired by firm I at time big T here. Okay, so now about the price process that we have here. So the price process here. So this price process, as firms take actions in the markets, their mass behavior will move the prices in the market. So this mass behavior we can model by the distribution of the empirical distribution of the states of firms across the market. So intuitively, it makes sense to assume that price indeed is a function of the empirical distribution of the states of firms across the market. But I will characterize that in a second. Okay, so this is our problem. And now in order to characterize the equilibrium price or market clearing price, which sets the rate demand and supply equal, we impose this clearing condition. So we set the sum of the traded rates per unit time to 0. So our goal is to find a collection of, for the agents problem, to find a collection of best response strategies that yield a Nash equilibrium for the system. So meaning that if agents or firms are in this equilibrium, one agent unilaterally is not motivated to deviate from that. So if the agent does that, given that other agents are following the Nash equilibrium strategies, it won't benefit further. So this problem in general is difficult to solve because of this interaction term that you see here. So each agent, in order to obtain its own best response strategies, it has to take into account the best response of other firms in the market, and also it should observe the states of other firms in the market, which is infeasible in practice. So we address this problem by using the MIFID game methodology. So in this methodology, we solve an approximate version of the game. So as the number of agents goes to infinity. So the key idea is to solve the system in the limiting case where the number of agents goes to infinity. In this case, we can just replace the empirical distribution to its infinite population limit, which we call the MIFID distribution. And what makes the problem simple is that each agent, instead of interacting with all other agents, is interacting with the mean-fit distribution, and this mean-fit distribution happens to coincide with the law of the state of the agent. So this is this consistency equation that we have. So the problem becomes simpler, and we are able to solve it mathematically. So here you see the infinite population version of the problem where the empirical distribution is replaced with the mean-fit distribution. So now we aim to find the Nash equilibrium for the limiting version of the problem. And here we have the clearing condition in the limiting case. So in the limiting case, we impose the weighted sum of the expected trading rate of representative agents from K subpopulations equal to 0. So this weight is the proportion of agents in each subpopulation. Okay, now with this setup, we can solve the problem. So I don't want to spend much time on this. So this has been addressed for a particular case of penalty function in our prior work. Now I want to move the principles problem. So the principle wants to set a penalty function to achieve its goals. First, I will explain a little bit about the penalty function itself, and then what are the goals of the principle. So we define an admissible set of penalty functions for the principle. So we impose some technical conditions on the penalty function. This is just to make sure that the resulting agents problem has a solution. And moreover, the principle doesn't want to impose a too large cost on the agents. The principle doesn't want to run them out of business. So the cost that it imposes on them, on average, it should be less than a specific amount. So this is the reservation cost that we impose. Okay, now with this, here is the principle's objective function. So here it is written in terms of a minimization problem. If I want to explain it in terms of utility maximization, so the principle's objective is the utility function, a nonlinear function of the weighted sum of the monetary penalties collected from the representative firm in the case subpopulation and the amount of recs submitted by the representative firm in this infinite population. So now this parameter here can be interpreted as the dollar value that the principal assigns to the recs submitted by the representative firm in subpopulation K. So through this parameter, the principal can make a preference between promoting rec generation or making revenues. Okay, so this is the utility function of the principle, and this is not a standard stochastic control problem. So the principle doesn't have a state equation, and in its utility, we have the terminal cost of the agents and the number of recs submitted by them. So these two both relate to the agents problem. So this is not a standard stochastic control problem, but with some mathematical manipulations, we can reduce this to a standard one. Okay, so here is just a summary about what I have presented so far. So first, the agent's problem is can be solved by an MSG, and we are interested in a Nash equilibrium for the agent's problem. And for a principal's problem, it's not a standard stochastic control problem, but with some mathematical manipulations, we can use some standard techniques from stochastic control. And in terms of the relationship, we are interested in Stackelberg equilibrium between the principal and the agents. Okay, now we follow the general methodology of principal agent gains. So in the first step, we fix the penalty function and solve the agent's problem, obtain the best response reaction of agents to this fixed penalty function. Then we recast the principal's problem to a standard one to use just standard techniques from stochastic control. And then having the response, the best response of agents to this fixed penalty function, we solve the recast problem for the principal. So what is now the optimal penalty function to obtain? Okay, so for the agent's problem, we use a variational analysis, and for the principal's recast problem, we use a probabilistic approach. So now I'm going to give more details about each step. So for first step, I'm not going through the details, so because we can obtain the best response strategies just by following the same lines in our prior work. So I invite you to check this work if you are interested in that. I would rather present the results and just interpret them. Okay, so here is the for a fixed penalty function is the best response strategies of agents. So as you can see, the generation rate is proportional to this process, Yx, and also the trading rate is proportional to this process. So this process is characterized here mathematically. So it is the conditional expectation of the derivative of the non-compliance penalty given the current information. So we can interpret this as the cost avoided by the agents by acquiring an additional rate, or its negative value as the marginal value of an additional rate acquisition. So now with this interpretation, the generation rate is proportional to the marginal value of an additional rate acquisition by a representative agent in this subpopulation, and the trading rate is proportional to the difference of the marginal value of rate to the agent and the price of rate in the market. So depending whether this marginal value is larger than the price or smaller, the trader and the firm may buy or sell REX. Now, if you look at the capacity expansion rate, it is proportional to this process YA. YA is characterized here. So it's the marginal value of rate acquisition times the remaining time. Okay, so we can interpret this as the marginal value of an additional increase in generation capacity. And it makes sense that it is proportional to the remaining time. So then we have less time until the end of the compliance period. So the marginal value of an increase in generation capacity is smaller. Okay, now with that, we can characterize the equilibrium rate price. So now that we have the best response trading strategy, we impose this clearing condition and we obtain the market clearing price. So it turns out that this market clearing price is a weighted sum of the expected marginal value of REX to representative agents from K subpopulations. Now, in order to completely characterize both the equilibrium price and these strategies, I need to characterize these processes, Yx and Ya. So we can show that indeed these two processes are backward components of this set of forward-backward SPs. So the forward components, they are just the state processes when we substitute the best response strategies and also the equilibrium price. And these backward components, we can just obtain them by using these mathematical formulas and using the Etro's lemma. So we can show that they satisfy these backward SPs. Moreover, this is a McKean-Vlasov forward accuracy because the forward component, as you can see here, is involved with the law of the state. So for penalty functions belonging to the admissible set of penalties that are introduced, we can show that there exists a unique solution to this set of equations in terms of the forward components, backward components, the quieting processes, and also the law of the state. Okay, now I'm going to explain how we can recast the principles problem. So if we look at this adjoint process and its value in the terminal time, so its value in the terminal time is equal to the derivative of the non-compliance penalty given the total number of breaks acquired at this time. So if this process changes, it will induce a change in the penalty function that would induce a change in the best response strategies of agent that would change their optimized paths and also their cost. And as a result of this, the mean fit will change. So this gives us an idea that indeed we can set these processes as the principles control action. And if we follow all the changes that the change in these processes makes in the system, we can identify the corresponding state components, which are listed here. So for the principle, if we assume that yx and ya are its control actions, these are the corresponding state processes. So the first one is just the rate inventory for a representative term. The second one is the generation capacity fraction for the representative firm, and this is the value process of a representative agent. So this at each point in time gives us the optimized expected cost to go from current time until the end of the compliance period. And we can obtain this SD by using the HAV equation and also the equals lemma. Okay, so this is the state processes of the principle. Now it's utility. So we should write its utility, which is only a terminal cost in terms of the state. So this is fine for this. This is the optimal terminal cost of agents at time at the end of the compliance period. So clearly we can replace this with the terminal value of the value process. But before that, I define a set of random variables representing these terminal values such that throughout time, this value process has satisfied the states that I just presented. And on average, the initial value process is less than a specific value, and it admits a Markov form such that, and we impose some conditions on this Markov function just to make sure that the resulting agent's problem has a solution. So we can show that this set of random variables is equivalent to the original set of contracts for the principle that I introduced at the beginning. So I'll skip the proof for the purpose of talk, and I'll move to the final problem for the principle. Okay, so this problem forms a mean field type, an extended mean field type problem for the principle. So it's an extended mean field type or McKean-Vlasov control problem, because if the principle changes its control actions, denoted in red here, the penalty function changes, and that induces new agents would react to that, and that would change the mean field distribution. So with a change in the principal's action, the mean field distribution would change. This is in contrast to the agent's problem. So if an individual agent changes its strategy, since it has an asymptotically negligible impact, the mean field distribution won't change. And also it is an extended mean field type problem, because here we have this the law of control action involved. So we use techniques from extended McKean-Vlasov control problems and use a probabilistic approach. And we get, for that, we get this first order condition. So here the talk becomes a little bit technical, but if you bear with me, I'll show the results and present some interpretations. So this is just the result of taking the first derivative of the Hamiltonian with respect to the control action. So, and since we have an extended McKean-Vlasov system, it involves the pressure derivative of the Hamiltonian with respect to the measure. So now, in order to characterize these first order conditions, we need to characterize these processes denoted by K. And this is just, we call them the principal's agent. We call them the principal's adjoint processes. Okay, we can show that they satisfy this set of backward estates. And we are lucky to be able to characterize the solutions to this set of backward estates just in a semi-explicit form, as you can see here. So if we plug in these semi-explicit solutions to the first order conditions, we get these control actions for the principal. So the first one is the marginal value of an additional increase in the capacity. So it is proportional with lambda, so the dollar value that the principal assigns to a rate acquired by a representative agent in this subpopulation, and it is proportional to the remaining time until the end of the compliance period. So this turns out to be completely deterministic. For Yx, the marginal value of rate acquisition, we obtain this equation. So this is a fixed point problem, but very interestingly, we are able to solve this. And the fixed point solution to this is, again, negative lambda k. So the dollar value that the principal assigns to a rate submitted by a firm in this subpopulation.
So the second term vanishes on the second line.
Yeah, so if we substitute this, yes.
So is that intuitively obvious at this stage in the analysis of the second, that big second term value?
Yes, yes, and yeah, it will, the second term will vanish, and now, yeah, I'm going to, yeah, this was a surprise to us, this solution to this problem, so we didn't expect that we can solve it in this way. But it has some interesting economical results. Yeah.
So you explain that because it's a terrific fact and coincidence. You said it was pretty surprising. So then that did happen. Oh my God, we can interpret this. So I'm interested in the interpretation.
Okay. Okay. So so this so now if we look at the relationship between the penalty function and this value at terminal time. Given that this is a constant, so the penalty function is it turns out to be a linear function of the number of bricks acquired by a representative term in subpopulation K. So now if we substitute that in the price process, in the equilibrium price characterization, it turns out that the price process is a weighted average of these dollar values that the principal assigns to representative firms from across the market. So the price process is constant, but this is not particular to our case when we solve the agent's problem without taking into account the principal's problem. The price process in the income population is constant and it's consistent with the literature, and this is because we don't all the noises that we have in the system they are idiosyncratic. So if we add, for example, a common noise to our model, the price in the income population would be stochastic as well. So now if we look at the penalty function, the linear penalty function that we have, so assume that firm K doesn't acquire any rate, so it should pay this cost. And by acquiring an additional rate, it will reduce its cost by minus lambda K. So this continues until the firm acquires a specific number of RECs, so it can reduce its cost. And after some point, this penalty function becomes negative, which means that that acts as an incentive. So if the firm generates a specific amount of RECs, and then if it generates more, it can receive also some incentives. So that implies a constant marginal value for obtaining an additional REC in for a firm, a representative firm, and also the price is a weighted average of these parameters. So now if we look at the generation cost, strategy, so it is constant. And also if we look at the trading rate, it is also constant, and it's a A function of the difference between the value, the dollar value that the principal assigns to the agent and the average dollar value of the bricks across the market. So depending on whether this is larger than this or smaller, the firm will buy or sell bricks. Moreover, we have this capacity expansion, which is deterministic. So all in all, this means that indeed an optimal brick market is not a brick market. It is more like a subsidy, so a tax and rebate system. So based on our model and our analysis, the most economically efficient and ideal way to set up a market-based regulation is just by imposing a tax. And this is an interesting result because there's always some these discussions around which regulation is really more effective. So we haven't modeled taxation explicitly in our model, but this is the result that we get when we want to optimize and find an optimal non-compliance penalty function for the regulator. So the taxation system is optimal here. Okay, so I'll stop here. So my talk was based on two these papers, and I would be happy to answer any questions if there are.